Hello, my name is Lillian Okibe. Welcome to my channel. So in today's video, we're going to be talking about lock extensions and whether it is a good idea for you to start your lock journey using lock extensions. So if that sounds like something that you're interested in, then please keep on watching. We are going to first start by talking about the advantages of lock extensions, and then move on to disadvantages of lock extensions, and then at the end of this video I'll be giving you guys my opinion on what I think about starting locks with lock extensions, whether I would recommend it or not. Now, the first and the major advantage, and I know that this is the reason why many people opt for this method, is that you get to have long, mature looking locks instantly. Like, you just walk into your salon and come out with like a full head of long locks as long as you want, as thick as you want, right? Now, the next advantage is that you get to skip the ugly phase. Now, when you start locks with many other methods, you're going to have that phase where your locks are going to your hair is going to move from the starter lock phase into mature looking locks, and that phase comes with a lot of shrinkage, a lot of frizz, a lot of confusion. Like, people don't know what you're doing, because at this point now people don't really understand locks, right? So your hair is going to look frizzy and it's going to look unkempt and like a mess to many people, and it's a lot. That starter lock phase is actually the most difficult phase for most people. Now, when you start your locks, or when you start your lock journey with lock extensions, you get to skip this phase. Another advantage that you experience if you choose to start your locks with lock extensions is that you're not going to have any issues with unraveling. Now, for many people who start their locks with many of the popular comb coils, social twists, and the likes, many people experience some unraveling. Like, when you first install your starter locks, before your locks move from starter locks to locks, right? Many people experience some unraveling, and some people get confused, like, why is my hair unraveling? Will my hair ever lock? Especially for people who have like looser curls. Now, right now, if you start your locks with lock extension, obviously you're not going to, because you're not starting with starter locks, you're not going to have any issues with like unraveling or anything like that. Another advantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that you're not going to experience shrinkage. Now, for many people, shrinkage is inevitable when you start locks. Like, there's nothing you can do to completely eliminate shrinkage. Shrinkage is part of the locking process. Now, when you start with lock extension, you're not going to have any shrinkage because you have long hair already, right? And because of the weight of the lock extensions, even your like normal natural hair is not going to experience as much shrinkage because of the extensions that you have. Another advantage is that you get to skip that phase of having a lot of discrimination from the world, like a lot of discrimination from people who do not really understand locks. Because the thing is, many people don't like locks in the early stages. Like, many people don't like locks in the beginning stages because they think it is untidy, it is unkempt. And now, like, now the way the world is right now, people tend to appreciate locks when it becomes mature and starts to grow long. Now, for many people who go through the lock journey of installing starter locks and then eventually, you know, maturing into mature locks, they are going to most likely have that phase where they're going to experience some form of discrimination from people who do not understand the process of locks, right? So now, if you start your locks with lock extensions, you get to skip this phase. Like, you go to the salon and come back with mature locks, and people start to admire your locks like immediately you get out, as long as like whoever did your locks is skilled in, you know, doing that, and the person knows what he or she is doing. Like, you get to come out with like beautiful head of locks, and you're not going to experience that discrimination that normally comes in the early stages of like most lock journeys. Another advantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that you get to have locks that are thick instantly. Like, for many people, when you start your locks with many other methods, your hair is going to be kind of small because you're used to having like big afro and everything, and then you install your starter locks. For most people, their hair becomes small. It is over time as their locks mature before their locks start to thicken out. Now, for people who start their locks with lock extensions, like, you get to have the thickness of locks that you want on day one. Like, you can decide to have your locks as thick as possible because you have control over the size of extensions that you're going to put into your hair, right? So you get to have thick locks instantly, as thick as you desire. And even if your hair is not so thick, you can decide to have very thick lock extensions, you know, even if your natural hair or like whatever hair you're starting with is not as thick. Now, another advantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that you get to have uniform looking locks, because lock extensions are like mostly pre-made, right? So there's a high chance that all your locks are going to look uniform, because you're basically installing like the same locks into your head. I don't know if that makes sense. Because the locks are handmade, you don't usually have those like budding and bobs, and some parts are swollen, some parts are not swollen. For many people who start their locks with many other methods, when you look at the individual lock, it is not usually as uniform. Like if you look at my lock now, you see that some parts are fatter, slimmer. Like there's like some kind of like budding going on, right? But when you start your locks with lock extensions, your locks are going to be like uniform. Most likely they are going to look more uniform than the average person like that starts their locks with many other methods, especially in the early stages of their lock journey. Now those are all the advantages. Those are not all the advantages. I'm sure there are more, you know, but let me just stop here so that this video doesn't end up being too long. Now let's move on to the disadvantages of starting your lock journey with lock extensions. The first disadvantage we are going to be talking about is also one of the things I mentioned earlier about the advantages, and that is the fact that when you start your locks with lock extensions, you do not experience shrinkage as much or at all. Now that you may think that, oh, that's a good thing, and in a way that's a good thing, but that's also a bad thing, because if you guys have watched my video where I talked about what to do to like how you can get your locks to be as thick as possible, I'm going to link the video up in the iCards. I talked about the role that shrinkage has to play when it comes to thickening of locks, right? So if you do not experience shrinkage, your locks are not going to be as thick, right? Because for many people who start their lock journey with the lock extensions, they install lock extensions and then they expect their hair to grow, continue to grow out, and like continue to grow into the lock extension and just have uniform long locks with the lock extensions, right? But the thing is, when you start your locks with lock extensions, because the weight of the extension is actually weighing down your own natural hair, that reduces the amount of shrinkage that your own natural hair is going to have. And the less shrinkage that you have, the thinner your locks are going to become. Like that's a general rule. Shrinkage actually helps to bulk up the locks. Now, since and this also depends on the length and like the size of extensions that you're installing into your hair, right? But generally speaking, when you install lock extensions, it reduces or completely eliminates shrinkage for your own natural hair that is like underneath. So as your hair continues to grow out, the lock extensions weighs down your hair, and that eventually makes, even if the extensions are thick, right, your new growth that is like your natural hair that grows out, the lock that grows out is not going to be as thick, because it doesn't have the room to shrink and swell. Another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is also related to my first point of no shrinkage, is that the fact that the weight of the extension is kind of like pulling on your own hair and like weighing it down. This can cause thinning, and that's why so many people that start their locks with lock extensions, over time they start to experience thinning with their own natural hair and thinning at the roots. Because when you have, as your locks mature, right, your locks start to get naturally, like as your locks get longer and like as they mature, they generally start to get heavier. Like normally, without lock extensions, your locks start to get heavier. But the thing about that is your roots, like if you take good care of your hair, no matter how small you started your locks or like how big your sections are, like each section the root of each section has the capacity to withstand the load of your hair even as it grows out, as long as you take good care of your hair. Now with lock extensions, because as your hair grows out, you now have added weight of your hair that is growing out, added shed hairs that is like falling out and all, and the weight of the extension. So for many people, the combined weight may become too much, and that's why over time, many people who start their locks with lock extensions start to experience thinning at their roots. Another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that after a while, you start to experience the line of demarcation between the extension and your natural hair starts to look weird. And this is something that many people don't usually talk about, but this is something that most people experience, especially for people who have their extensions in for a long period of time. After a while, you start the line of demarcation, that is where the extension and your own natural hair meet. It starts to look weird, and for some people it may start to thin out and, you know, eventually even break off, right? Another disadvantage of starting a lock to lock extension, and this also is related to this line of demarcation that I'm talking about, is that because the extensions, that's not your hair, that is basically an external body. So as your locks mature, as your hair sheds, and like as your locks form and everything, your hair kind of tends to like reject the extension because it is not your hair, and your hair wants to like get rid of it as quickly as possible, you know. And that's why sometimes you start to experience some like unraveling around where the extension and your natural hair meets. You may start to experience some unraveling, you may start to experience some breakage and all, and that is just, you may start to experience some slippage, you know, and that's basically just your hair trying to get rid of the external body that is just preventing it from flourishing, right? And this is something that so many people experience after a while. And for some people, it can be so severe that it ends up like the extensions end up like detaching from their own natural hair, and that's basically the hair trying to get rid of the extensions, because it's not your hair, so it's not going to seamlessly merge and like form and just coexist with your natural hair, because it is not your hair. Then another disadvantage of starting your lock to lock extensions is that this is something that everyone will experience. Like for some people it may be more obvious than other people. The texture of the extension will most likely not be the same texture with your own natural hair. So as your hair starts to grow, depending on how long your hair was when you installed the extension, as your hair starts to grow out, you may start to notice it even more. The texture of the extension will be different from the texture of your new hair, and that just kind of looks weird. And this also contributes to that line of demarcation looking weird, because now you have a part of the lock that looks a certain way, and then you have another part that looks different because the texture of the extension doesn't match. Even if you use human hair, and even if you use hair that is like very close to your texture, and that's because no two heads of hair is the same. Like my hair and my mom's hair are not the same, even though they look similar, but they are not the same. If you put them side by, if you look at my hair and my mom's hair, sometimes you may feel like, oh, you guys have the same hair. Or for those of you that have seen my sister or my brother, I've shown they've been on my channel before, I've done their hair on my channel before. You may see their hair and see my hair and be like, you guys have the same kind of hair. But yeah, it may look like we have the same kind of hair, but when you put our hair side by side, like if I make extensions with their own hair and install it on my hair, after a while that's when you start to see that they are not the same. So no matter how close the texture is to your hair, it will never merge seamlessly with your own extension. Like for some people, when you start out, it may look like, oh, it merged seamlessly, but over time, as your hair starts to grow, as your locks start to mature, you notice that the texture will most likely not be identical. It will most likely not be the same, and so you're going to have that difference in texture between the extensions and the roots of your hair. And for most people, when you come close, you can tell that the person has lock extension. Like the locks are not just like, it's not their hair that is growing from their scalp. Another disadvantage of starting a lock to lock extensions is that for many people experience shedding. Like, you know, when you start your locks with, like, generally the concept of locks is that your hair sheds, obviously, but your hair doesn't really shed out. You may have a few strands here and there once in a while that may fall out, but generally speaking, your hair doesn't like shed and fall out. Like all your shed hairs remain in your head, right? Now, for many people who start their locks with lock extensions, depending on the kind of hair that was used to install the extensions and, you know, how it was installed, people can experience some shedding, you know, maybe when they wash, or sometimes it may not even be when you wash. Like some people, when they like move around, they dust their head and stuff, you may have like fibers of the hair of the extensions shedding, you know. So shedding is an issue, can be an issue for many people when they start their locks with lock extensions. And another disadvantage of starting a locks with lock extensions is that it is very expensive. It is very expensive. Now, if you are someone that, if you've ever gone to get your hair locked, like maybe if you've ever gone to, maybe if you know anyone that started their locks by going to a loctician, when you're going to start locks by going to a loctician, you know how much you guys pay. Now, if you're going to start locks and you want to start your lock with lock extensions, you're going to pay like 2 times, 3 times, or even 4 times the price that you pay, that you would normally pay if you were just going to pay for just your hair for you to just install your starter locks. And that's because whoever is going to be doing your hair is going to first buy the human hair that they are going to use for the lock extension. Then they are going to lock the lock extension, and then they are going to install the lock extension into your hair, and then they are going to retwist your hair, you know. So they add the prices of all those things into the price that you're going to pay, and this can really add up really fast. This can add up really fast and actually be very, very expensive. And that's why if you choose to go the route of starting your locks with lock extensions, you really want to know what you're getting yourself into and be prepared for things that can happen and what to expect, so that you don't end up spending so much money getting the lock extensions and end up not being satisfied and taking the extensions down and regretting all that money that you have spent. Now, another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that you're going to experience discrimination within the lock community. Now, earlier, one of the advantages I mentioned was that you're not going to experience as much discrimination as people who start their locks with other methods, because your hair looks put together and like nice on day one, right? But you're going to experience discrimination within the lock community. You cannot go and be talking about your lock journey like that, because within the lock community, so many people feel that people who start their locks with lock extensions are frauds. Now, I'm not going to say whether they should not think that way, or they should, like, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, right? But I don't feel like anybody's opinion should actually determine how you live your life, right? But generally speaking, again, just know that if you choose to go the route of having lock extensions, you're going to experience a lot of discrimination, because for many people who start locks, they start locks for very deep reasons, right? And going through the whole process of like all the budding and all the freeze and all the people calling you names, your hair looking a mess and all that, for people, like, people bond with those things. Like, people in the lock community connect with each other due to those struggles that they go through, right? And that is actually what makes the bond in the community so strong, right? Now, for people who start their locks like lock extensions, who feel that you do not experience that part of like that, you know, struggle of like the starter lock phase and everything like that. So people feel that you cannot relate to the struggle of starting locks, and that's why they kind of like discriminate against people who start their locks with lock extensions. That is the truth. That's it. I'm not here to say whether it is right or wrong, but that's just something that you should expect if you choose to go that route, and you should be prepared for, right? You should be prepared for, and you should know that this is something that you should expect, and you should know, you should have, I feel like if you choose to go that route of starting your locks with lock extensions, you should be willing to not care so much about what other people think about how you chose to start it, but just be aware that this is something that can happen. Now, another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that your hair is going to be stiff for a while. Now, for those people who start your locks with many other methods, like from day one to as your locks mature, like your hair is like, it's not stiff, it moves. Like my hair moves, it shakes, like it's not stiff at all. And that's how it is for many people. Now, people who start their locks with lock extensions, at first, because the lock extensions was manually handmade, so it's going to take a while for the hair to like be soft a little. And the thing about is that many locticians, when they go ahead to create their lock extensions, they make it very tight because they want it to last very long, right? And that's why it ends up being very stiff. So you may have to wait a minute you may have to wait a while before your locks become very stiff and like moves easily and like just, you know, not be as stiff, right? So that's something that you should expect if you choose to go that route. Another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that you need to be on a regular maintenance, and this is something that I feel like people are not aware of when they start with lock extensions. They think they're just going to go install the lock extensions and just go about their life and everything will be fine, but that's not true. All these things I mentioned earlier about unraveling, like detaching of the extensions from your hair, like shedding and all those things, are things that would come up, and you need to go back to whoever did your hair, or even if someone else, you need to go back to a loctician to like fix all these issues for you and things like that. So for many, if you want to have lock extensions and you want your lock extensions to endure for as long as possible, you're going to need to be on a maintenance schedule, you know. Most likely that will be done by someone else, because you're most likely not going to be skilled enough to do what your hair needs, except you intentionally go to search for information. But you're going to have to be on a schedule, and this also adds to the cost. So it's not just about the money you pay when you install. You're going to need to bring out some money from time to time to go back to your loctician for maintenance. And the maintenance I'm talking about is not just retwisting the roots. Like for people who have other kind, like who start their locks in with the other traditional methods, is when they maintain their locks, what they basically go to do is retwist the roots. But for you, it's more than just it is more than just retwisting your roots. You're going to need to, you know, go and fix issues within the shaft of your locks because you have extensions. Another disadvantage of starting your locks with lock extensions is that as your hair grows out, there's going to be a big difference between the thickness of your new growth, which is your natural hair that is growing out and locking, and the lock extensions. Most times your natural hair is going to be thinner than the lock extensions. So many things contribute to this. One of the things that contributes to this is what I mentioned earlier about the shrinkage not happening, and so your locks cannot like really swell up and the likes. Another thing that will cause this is that most times when people go ahead to install lock extensions, you can't really predict how thick your locks are going to be, right? So most people end up installing like extension that is bigger than the lock that will eventually form on that section, right? And so at the end of the day, you are going to have thick ends, which are the lock extensions, and thinner roots, which are not lock extensions, which is your natural hair. So you're going to have that difference in thickness. Another reason why this is so is when you first start your locks are not just going to be thick on day one. For many people, they start to experience thickness from after 1 year and beyond. Their locks start to get thicker and thicker. So when you install lock extensions at the early stages of your lock journey, your hair has not thickened out at all, right? So you're going to have the ends because your hair is not really fully locked and it has not thickened out yet. So the base, which is your natural hair, is most likely going to be thinner than the ends of your hair, which is lock extensions. Now, these are all the disadvantages that I'm going to be talking about today. I'm sure there are more, but let's just stop here. So now let's go ahead and talk about what I think about starting locks with lock extensions. Now, personally, I would not recommend starting locks with lock extensions, and this is why. You guys that watch my videos, you guys know that I'm all for thickness. I like thick hair. I want my locks to be as thick as possible, and I encourage you guys to care for your locks so that your locks grow as thick as possible. Many of all these points that I mentioned earlier will tell you that starting with lock extensions will hinder how thick your locks will be. And the longer you keep the extensions in, the longer the extensions will hinder your locks from getting as thick as they possibly can. And that's why I would not recommend lock extensions. I feel like you can start your locks with lock extensions, but I feel like it's something that is temporary. Many people talk about lock extensions, they think about it as like a permanent solution, like a permanent style. They call it permanent lock extensions, but I feel like lock extensions are not created to be permanent. They're not created to remain in your hair forever. Like if you're someone that intends to have your locks for a while, I would not really recommend starting with lock extensions. And even if you start your locks with lock extensions, I would not recommend you leaving the lock extensions in for over a year. So let's say you want to have locks, right? But you're not interested in having locks for the long run. Like you just want to have it for a period, let's say a year. Then getting lock extension, I think, is a good idea. You can just go ahead, install a lock extension. When you're done, you can comb it out, cut it and comb it out, and go back to your, I don't know, to your natural hair or whatever, and have that feel of having locks, right? But if you're someone that you really want to have locks for a long time, for more than a year, I would not recommend starting your locks with lock extensions, because yes, you're going to have that instant gratification, right? But you're going to eventually have to let go of the extensions, and and it's going to be weird for you to move from having like maybe waist length locks, then all of a sudden you now have very short locks that are standing up and spiking up and looking weird. Because when you go ahead and remove the lock extensions at that 1 year, because you had lock extensions, the lock extensions actually kind of slows down and hinders your locking process of your natural hair, right? So when you finally go ahead and remove the lock extension, let's say after a year, it's like you have slowed down your locking process, and then you're still going to have to go through the whole journey again, right? So if you intend to start locks you want to have locks for a long time, starting lock extensions, I would not recommend you, because it will actually do more damage to your hair than, like, I feel like the stress that will come with that, and the money that you spend and everything, and the disappointment that will come with it, I feel like it's not worth the the joy of having locks instantly. And the thing about the so-called ugly phase is it can only be an ugly phase when you prepare that it's going to be an ugly phase. If you make up your mind that you're going to like love your hair regardless, like the time is just going to go by really fast. Before you know it, you are 1 year locks. Before you know it, you are 2 year locks, and you now have thick luscious locks that everyone is talking about, that everyone like loves to see, everyone likes, and people are now asking you questions. How come your hair is this cute and everything like that? So I feel like that shortcut is not the best shortcut to take if you intend to have locks for a very long time. But if you just want to have locks temporarily for like a year or 1.5 years, then go ahead and start your lock to lock extensions. If you go to a very good loctician, you may actually not have any of these issues that I mentioned, because you are not going to keep the lock extension in for long. Or maybe you just want to have locks for like 6 months, then go ahead and start your lock to lock extension. But if you want to have locks for a very long time, I would not recommend it. But if you must, yes, you can start your lock to lock extension. Then maybe after a year, you can go ahead and cut out the lock extensions. But 1 year, at 1 year is like your locks have not even formed yet. At 1 year, you know, for many people, at 1 year your locks have not even formed yet. And if you started with lock extensions, this extension will even slow down the locking process of your own natural hair. So at 1 year, even when you cut down lock extension, that's when you're not going to start to experience your own ugly phase or like your own ugly stage. Meanwhile, if you had just started your journey from scratch, by that 1 year you're already in a place where you are now comfortable with your locks. So that's my own advice, that's my own 2 cents. By the end of the day, it all depends on you. It is your hair. No one has the right to tell you how to do your hair or what to do to your hair. So if you decide that you want to go the lock extension route, go ahead, do what makes you happy. So that comes the end of this video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up. And if this is your first time on my channel and you like to see more videos from me, you like to see how my locks progress, then definitely subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. See you guys in my next video.